Today, we're going to break down one of the biggest economic stories happening right now. It's this high-stakes fight the Federal Reserve is waging against inflation, and more importantly, how their decisions are creating a kind of invisible trap for the entire economy.
So, picture this. It's March 2026, and all eyes are glued to the Federal Open Market Committee, the FOMC. I mean, this is the small group at the Federal Reserve that basically sets the economic temperature for the entire country. And with inflation still being a huge problem, their next move could be the difference between a smooth landing and a full-blown recession.
And then, after all that buildup, all the waiting, what was their big move? To just stand perfectly still. They decided to hold interest rates steady, continuing a policy that's been putting the squeeze on the economy for years.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. How can doing nothing possibly be the most important economic decision of the entire year? Well, to understand that, we need to pop the hood and look at the powerful tools the Fed is working with.
To really get why this matters so much, you first have to understand the main tool the Fed uses to steer the entire U.S. economy. The best way to think about it is like a giant control valve.
At the center of everything is this one number, the federal funds rate. Now, I know, it sounds super technical, but the concept is actually pretty simple. It's just the interest rate banks charge each other for really short-term loans. But here's what's so important. That one rate is like the foundation for almost every other interest rate you deal with. Your mortgage, your car loan, your credit card. It's the first domino to fall.
And this is a brilliant way to see how the Fed actually uses that valve. When they need to cool things down and fight inflation, they tighten it by raising rates. That makes borrowing money more expensive for everyone, which slows down spending. On the flip side, if they want to get the economy going, they loosen the valve, lowering rates to make borrowing cheaper and encourage growth.
So why are they always fiddling with this thing? Well, it's because they're constantly trying to juggle two often competing goals. It's what's known as their dual mandate. Number one, keep as many people employed as possible. And number two, keep prices stable, which to them means getting inflation down to about 2%.
And this is where we are right now. That valve is cranked tight. Rates are in this highly restrictive range. And make no mistake, this isn't a neutral position. This is a deliberate choice to slam on the economic brakes and slam on them hard. So the big question is, how did we get here? Why is the Fed keeping that valve so tight for so long? It's really a story about the aftershocks of the pandemic, which have led to a very unique, very tricky kind of economic trap. Let's just quickly walk through the timeline. It all starts between 2021 and 2023 when that post-COVID shock hits. You've got massive government stimulus meeting total supply chain chaos, and bam, inflation just explodes. In response, the Fed launches its most aggressive rate hiking campaign in a generation. But here's the problem. Even after all that, core inflation turns out to be incredibly sticky. It just refuses to come down. And that's what forces them into this higher-for-longer policy that we're seeing in March 2026.
And you don't have to take my word for it. This is the crucial point, and it's coming directly from the Fed's own statements. They have said, point blank, that they will not loosen that valve. They will not cut rates until they have gained greater confidence that the war on inflation is truly over. This isn't just a policy. It's a promise to be extremely cautious.
So this decision to just hold firm rests on two main pillars. Pillar A is obvious, that sticky inflation is still too high. But Pillar B is just as important. The U.S. economy, especially the job market, has been shockingly strong. With unemployment so low, the Fed feels like it has the wiggle room to keep rates high without immediately crashing the entire system. Now, what's so interesting about this moment is just how different it feels from the last major crisis. We aren't seeing a sudden, catastrophic collapse like we did in 2008. No, this is something slower, more of a painful, steady grind.
And this comparison is absolutely key. You see, 2008 was a leverage shock. The banking system itself was collapsing. The Fed's solution was to open the valve all the way, slash rates to zero, and flood the system with cash. Today, we're in an inflation lock. The problem is inflation, so cutting rates isn't an option at all. It would be like throwing gasoline on a fire.
So what does this slow grind actually feel like for you and me? Well, it's really a tale of two different worlds. If you're a borrower, you are feeling the squeeze everywhere. Your mortgage, your car loan, your credit card bill. But if you're a saver, for the first time in over a decade, those high rates mean your savings accounts and CDs are finally earning you a decent return.
And you can see this dynamic playing out perfectly in the housing market.
On one hand, high mortgage rates have just crushed affordability for anyone trying to buy a new home. But at the same time, all the people who already own homes with those crazy low rates from a few years ago are now locked in. There's no way they're selling and giving up that rate. It's created this huge stalemate that's basically frozen a big chunk of the market.
Okay, so this all brings us to the big question. Where do we possibly go from here? With the Fed just holding steady, the economy's future really comes down to a couple of different potential paths.
You can really boil it down to two main scenarios. The base case is basically more of the same. This slow grind where high rates keep dragging on the economy, but inflation does eventually start to cool off. The much scarier bear case is that inflation stays sticky or even picks up again, forcing the Fed to keep rates high for so long that it finally breaks something and triggers a pretty bad recession.
So if you want to follow along at home, this is basically your economic dashboard. First and foremost, you got to watch the monthly inflation reports, the CPI and the PCE. Those are like the economy's temperature gauge. Then, keep a close eye on the jobs data. If the unemployment rate starts shooting up, that could force the Fed to act. And finally, track overall economic growth, or GDP, and look at things like corporate default rates to see if there's any deep stress building up under the surface.
And that leaves us with this final thought. The Fed's stated goal is to pull off a perfect soft landing, to tame inflation without causing a recession. But when you've had the economic valve cranked this tight for this long, you have to ask, how much control do they really have left? Are they still flying the plane, or are they just passengers along for the ride like the rest of us?